Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners Board Briefing. Audience members, I want to start by asking you to please silence your electronic devices. And for those presenting today, make sure to turn your mic on when you begin speaking and off when you've completed your remarks. For all presenters, please state your name for the record before speaking or responding to questions. So we have two board briefings today. The first one is on Preschool for All, focusing on rate setting and inclusion support. And this was brought forward by District 1, so really appreciate that. Before we get started with that, though, I did just want to mention that we have Denisa McLean, who's here. She is the new director of our Preschool and Early Learning Division, and so we're really glad that she is joining us on her second day. So everybody, you know, keep that in mind, her second day. And of course, Rachel Pearl, the interim director of the Department of Community Services. So with that, Commissioner Moyer, I'll turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Today is an opportunity for us to take a look at two specific issues that I think now is a good time, now that we're deeper into the program and have some lessons learned to discuss. But I want to start out talking a little bit about, you know, what our goals are with Preschool for All and upcoming conversations. One is, you know, we are talking about and thinking about Preschool for All both through the lens of how incredibly beneficial early learning is for children throughout their lifetime, but also as an economic development tool for the county. Again, in lifetime earnings, less criminality, less justice and other social service involvement, but actually in real time, that kids who have access to free preschool, their families see increased wages, better career projection, less loss of productivity. Preschool for All specifically has created hundreds of businesses and thousands of jobs. And through work that we've done looking at the economic impact of the Preschool for All program, we know that we are getting at least $3 for every dollar we are putting in economic development in our county. So in keeping with our theme of continuous quality improvement, we're going to look at two issues that have come up in various different forums and I think deserve a deeper dive by the commission to look at how we might want to engage in these topics. The first is around our rate setting methodology. For lots of reasons, preschool has been difficult to look at the actual cost of care versus what families can bear to spend. And so, you know, we, like many other governments, including the state of Oregon, began our program, you know, in earnest with a market rate tool to help us figure out where we should be. And then we certainly took that with some of our values in our Preschool for All program and added to that. But now is a good time as we approach universality to go deeper. And so we're going to begin with a panel, and it's a panel of one, which is Dana Hepper from the Children's Institute, to talk about rate setting, some of these issues, and an alternative approach, which is looking at the true cost of care, to help us think about where we want to go with the rate setting conversation and what providers are really experiencing when it comes to the resources necessary to deliver on the Preschool for All program. And so I'm going to start by welcoming Dana up to the dais. She's got a PowerPoint, and then we'll reserve some time after for Q&A on this topic. Thank you so much for being here. Appreciate it.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Vega-Peterson and Commissioner Moyer, members of the Commission. My name is Dana Hepper. I'm the Director of Policy and Advocacy at the Children's Institute. where we are working to make Oregon the best place to be a kid. Feel pretty happy to be doing that work here in Multnomah County, where we are actively committed to that same goal. I'm here to provide an overview of the two primary methods that publicly funded preschool and childcare use to set the rates that they pay to providers who participate in their programs. I've had a chance to be a member of multiple committees in Oregon that have developed both of these approaches. So we'll look at the market price or market rate approach to setting rates and the shortcomings of that approach, and the more recent up-and-coming operating cost or true cost of care approach to setting rates and the benefits of programs moving in that direction. Next slide. So this is just a high-level overview of the two approaches that many publicly funded programs are using to set their rates. So on the left there in blue, you see the market rate approach. This is a stagnant point-in-time analysis of the current cost that people are currently paying in public preschool or childcare programs. And this is collected just through a survey. We reach out to childcare providers or preschool providers across a given region, state of Oregon, for example, and we ask them, what is your tuition rate for a preschool-age child? What is your tuition rate for an infant? What is your tuition rate for a school-age child? And we take all those numbers and we put them together and we identify kind of where is the median, the norm, the average of those rates, you know, where can we set a bar for where 75% are below a certain rate, et cetera. And then, of course, we collect that data, let's say in 2024, and then we publish the report on that data in 2025, and then, of course, it would inform a rate that would be developed in 2026. So by the time we use this point-in-time data, we're already a couple years behind when the data was actually collected. That is how we set rates in Oregon's employment-related daycare program, our state child care subsidy program. That is the way that the federal government has directed states to set their rates in their child care subsidy program for decades since the establishment of federal child care funding. But just recently, the feds have acknowledged that this rate-setting approach has shortcomings and offered states the option of moving in a different direction, and some communities and states have started to move toward the true cost of care approach. This involves the creation of a dynamic cost modeling tool. Basically, you're creating a complicated spreadsheet that considers multiple factors that might drive costs, and you draw the information that you put into that spreadsheet from multiple sources. So as opposed to a market rate where you're just collecting existing tuition rates, in a cost model rate, you might look at what are the multiple ways that we could look at wages, not just the current wages that are currently being paid, but do we want to look at educator salaries in the K-12 system? Do we want to look at living wage as a salary marker? What are the different places we could get the data that we need to inform what a program should cost? And then it can be adjusted as you make different policy decisions. So you decide, okay, this would be the cost of the program if we went with the K-12 teacher salary versus this would be the cost of the program if we went with the living wage salary. And what is our policy choice? And how does that policy choice then affect the cost of the program? So it's much more dynamic and interactive in that way to respond to, so that you as decision makers in this program have a sense of, when we make this policy choice, how is this going to impact the costs associated with the program? And I would just highlight, right now, I don't think we have a good sense of if we are over or underpaying for the 6-hour day model and the 10-hour day or workday model, because we haven't looked at what we assume those costs should be in this program to this point. I didn't mention that I'm a member of the technical advisory group that's looking at the taxing mechanism for Multnomah County Preschool for All. And I think this has been one of the big questions, is like, what should we assume the costs are associated with the program moving forward? And we hear concerns from providers, for sure, but we don't have enough information without a cost of care to determine like, should we be increasing those rate assumptions or not? This kind of a tool would be incredibly helpful, I think, for decision making. Next slide. So there are 3 kind of types of data you can bring into cost modeling for an early learning and care program. One is price, and this is literally just tuition rates, what is currently being charged. And this just reflects this balance between what providers can charge to actually pay their bills and what parents can actually ultimately afford in the market. And you can't just go out and set your rates willy-nilly, as anyone who's worked in business could understand. You have to find that price point that will actually fill your classroom with tuition-paying clients. And so that is the balance that comes into price or tuition rates. The second thing we can look at is costs. And so that's literally asking childcare providers to share their budgets. How much are you spending on salaries? How much are you spending on benefits, supplies, and materials, insurance costs, tax prep services, et cetera. So we can look at how the dollars that are coming in are actually being distributed to their costs that they are paying to run their program. This is what is currently true in their programs, although it may not reflect a sustainable or quality approach to spending. It just reflects what they can afford. And so, for example, I've talked to many childcare providers who operate childcare businesses, and they themselves just don't take a salary, or they take a salary that's far too low, or they've had to keep their teacher pay at $18 an hour, and that's led to high levels of turnover because people can't afford to live on that wage. So it doesn't reflect our ideal costs, it just reflects what childcare providers are currently spending, what their expenses truly are. And then finally, the third type of data we can look at is true costs. And so this is where the cost might say, these are our current wages. The true cost might say, these are the wages we believe should be paid in a program that is sustainable and quality, that supports retention, professional learning, et cetera. And that could bring you to the true cost data. Next slide. So this slide just shows how those data points connect to rate setting, or the rate setting methodologies. So that data point of cost or tuition rates, that is what informs a market rate, and that is the only data point that informs a market rate approach. What are people currently charging? The cost information, or looking at childcare providers' budgets, that would be one part of what would inform a cost model approach. But what it would in part tell you is what are the gaps between what people are currently spending money on and what they need to spend money on to operate a quality preschool program. So you might say our current cost for health insurance is $0 because we don't offer our providers health insurance. But our preferred cost for health insurance might be $1,000 per employee per month, or whatever that appropriate cost is going to be for health insurance for your employees, so you reduce absenteeism, support employee health, support quality of program and consistency of care for children, for example. This helps you identify the gap between the current expenses and the ideal expenses in a quality program. Next slide. I'm happy, by the way, too, if questions arise as I'm talking, just jump in,
or we'll go through and make sure everyone has a chance to ask questions.
Perfect. Great. Thanks, Dana. Great. So as you might be piecing together by this point in the presentation, there are shortcomings to the market rate approach to setting rates, especially if our goal is to support a quality, sustainable pre-K programs across our region. So as I mentioned, tuition rates have to consider what parents can actually afford, or else you can set whatever tuition you want, but you may have an empty program because nobody can actually afford to attend your program. This requires providers to adjust their expenditures or their costs based on how much money they can bring in the door, and that often can reduce the quality of the program itself. So you can't afford to purchase, quality supplies. I I used to be even an elementary school teacher. I was often found myself at the Goodwill bins digging for books and things I could take into my classroom because our school system didn't have enough money to pay for those books to be new and fresh. It'd be great to have, a more diverse set of books, but those often require you buying books that are new. It'd be great to have hardcovers, but those are more expensive. For the child care sector, the vast majority of their expenses are staff, wages, and benefits. And so if you aren't bringing in enough to cover your true costs, staffing is a place where you are going to have to cut expenditures because it's most of your expenditures. And this is a field where most of the people working in the field are women, and a very large percentage of the people working in the field are women of color, Black, Indigenous women, immigrants, et cetera. And so when we underfund early learning and childcare, we underfund the wages of women, people of color, and immigrants in our communities. Finally, there's no consideration for differentiated child needs in a market-based approach. It's just what a parent can afford. And so as a parent, nor would the law allow a provider to charge me more because I had a child that had exceptional needs, more than a typically developing child. And so there's no adjustment for addressing differential child needs in a market-based approach. And really the summary is a market-based approach in a broken market really doesn't work. Next slide. Specific to Oregon and applying a market-based approach to Multnomah County, Oregon State University does the market rate study on a biennial. So they look at what tuition is being charged across the entire state of Oregon. And Multnomah County is actually split into two regions in this study. Portland's rates in our child care subsidy program are lumped in with Bend, Corvallis, Eugene, Monmouth, strangely, and Ashland. East Multnomah County rates are lumped in with Medford, Roseburg, Brookings, et cetera. And so we don't actually have, from the state market rate study, a sense of what care costs or should cost in Multnomah County. We just have an amalgamation of what care costs in some of the more expensive urban settings across the entire state, and some of the moderately expensive suburban rates across the state. As we've discussed at length, market prices are tuition rates. They're not reflective of true costs, so that's another gap. And then third, the data that we get from a market rate study lags 2 to 3 years behind setting the rates. So in 2024, Oregon State University would survey childcare providers. They would analyze the data, release their report in 2025, which would then set rates which would take effect in 26, 27, for example. So by the time you've used the data to set the rates, you're setting your data based on rates that are 2 years old, and chances are childcare providers have updated their rates since they answered the survey. Next slide. So for these reasons, most large public pre-K programs across the nation have used a cost of care model to establish their rates. It aligns the actual cost of providing the services with the inputs you're expecting into the program. So if we expect a certain amount of wages, we're plugging in the cost of those wages into the cost model. If we expect a certain amount of benefits, and we think that to be reasonable, then we plug the true cost of those benefits into the model. Health insurance, if we are in contract with these providers and we expect them to carry liability insurance, we assess what the true cost of that liability insurance is, and we plug that into the cost of the model so that our rates actually reflect their costs, so that we know can operate with confidence that they can operate their programs for the amount of dollars that we're providing to them. The cost of care, as I've mentioned, uses those multiple data sources, like what are the true costs of training and professional learning, how much do we need to set aside for planning time so that our classrooms are well organized, designed, have engaging activities, How are we supporting educators? What are our tools to support inclusion, for example, and we've built those into the cost model. And then the output of the cost model is an adjustable annual cost per child. So like I said, as you make a policy decision, you can toggle on and off that policy decision in a cost model and say, like, okay, if we make that cost model, our cost per child is going to change by, it's going to go up by $3, or it's going to go down by $50. It's going to be up by $1,000 if we make this policy decision. And so you can in real time see the impact of your decisions on the cost for an individual child and the cost of the program overall. Next slide. So this just outlines a typical process for establishing a cost model, and typically this process can be completed in 3 to 6 months. And it starts with engaging constituents, and in this case, really engaging the providers of preschool in the region and getting from them that data around, like, really scrubbing their budgets. What are they actually spending money on? Where are they seeing that their funding is adequate, and where do they see shortcomings in their budget relative to what the targets are for quality outlined in the program? So collecting all that data and then putting that data into the model and then running different scenarios. Like I said, you know, the one cost model we've seen that we as advocates work to develop and thinking about statewide preschool and childcare, we have options. Like, we can run the scenario under current wages in the sector, K-12 wages in the sector, living wages in the sector, and we can literally see how those different scenarios impact the total cost statewide of operating childcare and preschool in our state. And you can run scenarios, for example, you know, I know inclusion has been a topic of conversation, so you could say, you know, we want a certain percentage of our classrooms to operate, let's say, with lower ratios, so that we make sure we have classrooms that are appropriate settings for children who are most impacted by disabilities, let's say. So you want to have some of your classrooms in a 2 to 18 kid model, and you want some of your classrooms a 3 to 15 kid model, let's say. And you could say, okay, what's the cost if we have 20% of our classrooms with that more inclusive model? What's the cost if we have 30% or 10%? And you can see how your costs would adjust based on the policy decisions that you're making. So those are the scenarios. So the cost model doesn't give you a single answer. The cost model gives you a tool to assess the choices that you're making, informed by their true costs. And that's the last step. Use that cost model in real time to inform your rate decisions and your policy decisions moving forward in the process. So hopefully it's not like you do a cost model one time, you set a rate, you put it on the shelf, and you never talk about it again. Hopefully you've done a cost model, and then you regularly review that cost model in terms of policy changes in the region. You know, there's kind of a big upheaval in the insurance industry right now. So insurance costs are going up much faster than inflation, for example. And so you might want to not just leave that insurance cost point stagnant in your policy model for 10 years. You might want to, every 2 years, go back and say, hey, what's happening with insurance? Let's make sure it reflects real-time data and use that to adjust our rates. So we're not just saying 4% this year, but we're saying like a percentage based on how costs are adjusting in the world that childcare and preschool providers are living in. And this is the last slide. Oh, thank you so much. So as just in summation, you know, a true cost of care model would really allow this board to assess how much money the Preschool for All program really needs to be a sustainable and accessible program that is going to function well long-term and serve our community well, so that we make sure we have providers who are truly able to participate and serve the families in our community. It allows us to say whether our current rates are sufficient, insufficient, or even overly sufficient. One thing that's been a recent frustration for me is that our market rate study shows at the state level for our child care subsidy program that we actually are overpaying school-age childcare providers and underpaying birth to 5 providers, and particularly underpaying infant providers. And so, and that is just because that's how it works in the world, right? Because if you're a school-age provider, you can charge a little more than your expenses, and maybe you use that money to backfill your infant expenses because you can't charge people what it actually costs to provide infant care. But we're reinforcing that model with our market rate study. Whereas with the true cost of care, you can just actually match expenses to rates. And you can determine whether your rates are actually sufficient for providing inclusive programs that fully integrate all of our young children with disabilities and delays and other needs into our preschool system in a way that also is sustainable, which is obviously really important to make sure that we do. It's a great boost to our K-12 system. It really leans into the full value of all the human children in our communities, and the right and just thing to do. I'll just close with saying that, state and federal budgets, as your county budgets too, I'm sure, are challenged right now. I think we're going to have a huge lift in maintaining state and federal investments in preschool, childcare, Head Start. And so it's one of the reasons I'm so glad we have Multnomah County Preschool for All to serve as a boost to local families so that they can afford to live and stay in our community. They can afford to work and take care of their families because they have this support. And that's why we're so passionate about making sure this program is sustainable for the long term. This is a new program. We're still figuring things out in terms of implementation. That is to be expected. We have to be dynamic and responsive to make sure that we're able to do that. I really think a true cost of care tool would be one way to do that work effectively. Hoping we move forward in that direction in our community. That's all.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dana. Really appreciate you being here with us. We can go to the board for questions, and since you kicked us off, we can start with Commissioner Singleton.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dana, so much for putting this together and presenting today, and the work that you're also doing on advisory committees. I just have one question. You mentioned that the feds were initially requiring market rate, but that there's allowance now to do true cost of care. Is the state moving to true cost of care?
Yeah, thank you, Commissioner Singleton. Great question. One of the advisory committees I've had a chance to sit on for the state was the True Cost of Care Advisory Committee to inform our child care subsidy program. Due to lack of funding in our child care subsidy program, we have not implemented the true cost of care. So we have a model, but we have not taken the final step in that process to use the model to inform policy and rate setting decisions. So we are currently under a market rate model for the state child care subsidy program still.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And part of what I think because I want to understand the impact if one program is using true cost and others are using market, and what does that do to the industry and the providers. And I don't think we know that unless you've seen other states where there's places that have kind of both going on depending on which jurisdiction is running the program.
Yeah, I think that's a great question too, and I don't have a ready data-based answer. I mean, certainly if I were a child care provider, the wise business decision would be to prioritize slots for the program that is paying me adequately as opposed to prioritizing slots for the program that pays me inadequately. Most of the providers I'm familiar with often are blending multiple programs. And so they're 50% employment-related daycare childcare subsidy and 50% state preschool promise. And that allows them to kind of hit a middle ground in terms of the wages and benefits they'd like to provide. It's not everything they want, but it's helping them. The one program that has a cost of care model, although preschool promise needs to be updated and more dynamic. The one program that has that creates a stability in the sector that child care subsidy vouchers alone don't provide.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you. Commissioner Brown Edwards.
First, I want to thank Commissioner Moyer for bringing this forward. I think it's a perfect time to have this discussion. I think starting up a program, market rate is like just the natural thing that you would start, but that I think this is the point in the program to look at true cost of care. Thank you for the presentation. I don't really have any questions, but I just want to state my support for looking at this model. So somebody who spent 25 plus year in the K-12 system, I understand the frustration of what happens, like, here's what we're going to give you, run this K-12 school program, when actually the revenue that schools are given don't meet the cost of care. I mean, it just, you take the, as an example, the current, there's just an artificial cap on students receiving services under IDEA, and they just, it's an artificial cap just for cost reasons, for cost reasons for the state, not necessarily because there's, not the students have a capped need. And so the state has, I think, evolved over their, whatever, 100 years of creating this school funding formula, which does weight some things. So it's an improved model versus just, here's the money that we think that we have to give you and you'll figure it out, versus you're serving, a certain number of students who have different needs and you get different weights for that.
Yeah.
Really, one of the things that also resonated for me is this sort of the statewide market study versus like Multnomah County. Going back to 1997, I advocated for a cost, what was called a cost of doing business factor in the state school funding formula, to acknowledge that it costs more to educate students in Portland than it does in Pendleton, Salem, or Medford. And that it's been sort of a 20-year ongoing discussion or argument with the state about that. I mean, it clearly costs more to offer school services, wages are higher, housing is higher. I mean, all the costs are higher in a metro area, but not been acknowledged. And that may have something to do with there's 198 districts, and most of them are smaller. So I believe this is the right step to sort of evolve the cost formula. One thing I would just ask is that when we look at the true cost and we look at providing a quality program, I would say, how do we link the cost also with actually what's being provided? And I look at Head Start as a potential model. So having served on the Head Start governing board at Portland Public Schools, which is the largest Head Start in the state, there's some very clear, like, here's what the Head Start program offers in terms of equality. And, quarterly, the Head Start governing board looks at how they're doing against those benchmarks, and it's part of the sort of agreement on here's the funding for a particular Head Start program, and then here's the sort of outcomes. And they're very student-based outcomes and also some parent engagement outcomes. So that would be something that I'm curious about, and I don't know, maybe does it already have that? Or
I would defer to the Multnomah, Commissioner Edwards, Chair Vega Peterson, members of the commission. I don't know if the same protocols are here with the state legislature.
You can always tell when somebody is used to testifying at the legislature when they come here.
That's my day job. I can't speak specifically to the Multnomah County approach to monitoring. I would defer to Multnomah County staff that are involved directly in this work to do that. But I would say, general rule, yes, in early learning, unlike kind of in K-12, in early learning, you typically, there's a grant or contract that's been provided to a provider of preschool services. There are standards associated with that contract. So that is true in Head Start. There are 6,000 federal performance standards that Head Starts are responsible for meeting. It's quite robust. Many focused on child outcomes, but also have you covered the outlet with an outlet cover so a child doesn't electrocute themselves in their care? Have you put the paint on an upper shelf in a locked cabinet so there's no risk of like toxins accessible to children?
Read through all those reports.
Exactly. They're quite robust. People have a love-hate relationship. But State Preschool Promise also has programmatic standards, and I'm sure Multnomah County Preschool for All has program standards that providers have agreed to meet. And then you have two simultaneous tools for supporting meeting those standards. One is the support side, the carrot side. Have we given you the professional learning opportunities and the coaching opportunities to help you move toward those standards, to be in alignment with them, because we have determined they are critical for the quality of the care? And then second is the stick side, the monitoring side, where we come in often unannounced and say, are you in compliance with these standards? And we've got our kind of clipboard and our checklist, and we're making sure when we come in on a random day that those protocols are being met. And I'm guessing those pieces are in place here, but I don't know the details of what they look like in this community.
Yeah. I actually don't like to think of the stick. I like to think of it as like coming in to provide support so they
Yes.
can offer a high-quality program.
Yes.
And I don't need to know that now. I just, it's one of those things where if we move to that and it's very explicitly because we want a certain quality of standard, is that we know what those standards are.
Right.
But I'm very supportive, and I appreciate this being brought forward. And again, thank you, Commissioner Moyer, for bringing it forward.
Thank you. Commissioner Jones-Dixon.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Commissioner Moyer, for bringing this forward, and thank you for educating me on just the different options. Based off of the presentation, I think the true cost of care will be interesting so we can understand what we are investing in and the expected outcomes and everything. So I don't have any additional questions. I believe there's a part two, is that right, as far as the panel is concerned?
Yeah.
So thank you,
Yes.
Dana, for the information this morning.
Yeah, sure.
And then welcome, Director McLean.
Yeah. Thank you. Any questions from you, Commissioner Moore, comments before we move on to the next part?
Just, I think we continue to try to figure out various policy proposals. One of the things I liked about your presentation was talking about the dynamic nature of the true cost of care tool, that, not only does it give us a more robust look at what it takes to operate within, the rules of our program, but also this ability to play with policy and have a tool that can really show that. Some of the things that I wonder about, because we are existing in a landscape where other programs in the state, either because they're state funded or a federal pass-through, are not doing this, or I have serious nervousness about their future. If I'm wanting to make sure that Preschool Promise and Head Start aren't going to lose capacity, what is, how should we think of ourselves as a player in at least the Multnomah County preschool and to some degree infant toddler? Because we've always acknowledged that, again, we could be this program that people ran to, and therefore they can't continue to do infant toddler at a loss. And so I guess I'm just trying to think about like how you, and this may be a follow-up question for a consultant who does this work, but how are those type of factors played in?
Yeah.
Where we have to think about, like, I don't want to discourage people from having Preschool Promise or having Head Start or being a mix or
Yeah.
or whatever. But I think Commissioner Singleton was talking a little bit about like, how do we impact each other and what does a stabilized rate
Yeah.
allow a provider to do or not?
Yeah. Commissioner Moyer, thanks for the question. I think it's a really important one. One of the curiosities I've had about Multnomah County Preschool for All and implementation is whether there is a benefit to topping off some of the lower rate programs to retain state and federal funding in this community as a strategy. Because as you all are, I'm sure, are well aware, we have seen some decline in state and federal slots in this community. That decline, I think, comes from a few different places. One is the federal government has been operating under a continuing resolution for many years now. What a continuing resolution means is that they are flat funding programs, no adjustments for inflation, no investments are being made. And so if I'm a Head Start provider, maybe my rate was $18,000 per child in 2023. In 2024, it was still $18,000 per child. In 2025, it would continue to be $18,000 per child. And meanwhile, my wages have gone up, my benefit costs have gone up, my rent or space costs have gone up, my food costs have gone up, et cetera. Insurance costs have gone way up. And that is not sustainable for me to continue to receive the same dollar amount from the feds year after year. So one thing I might be doing is appealing to the feds, hey, what I'd like to do is close one of my classrooms and redistribute the money I'm getting for those 20 slots into the rest of my classrooms to give myself an inflationary increase so I can keep up with the cost of care. And if I'm a provider, that's a fair question to ask. I don't want to close a classroom, but I can't make the numbers work anymore with the lack of inflationary increase year after year. And so I do wonder if one of the policies that Multnomah County might want to consider as you join us in lobbying the legislature and lobbying Congress for increased funding for early learning and care as a complement to the local funding is to potentially plus up some of those other programs. So you retain, if Preschool Promise is giving providers $16,000 a slot, but what they really need is $18,000 a slot for that 6-hour day. Would Multnomah County want to supplement with those additional $2,000, make sure that you're meeting the Multnomah County Preschool for All standards with that supplement, but you've retained the $16,000 state dollar investment instead of losing it and just having people let go of their state preschool promise to pick up Multnomah County Preschool for All because it's going to pay them $2,000 more a kid. So that policy is not currently in place, but it's the type of thing I think you could put into a cost model to help determine, would this strategy help us retain our state funding, and what would be the pros and cons in terms of costs and taking an approach like that. But also tell your legislators to stop cutting funding for state preschool, please.
Great, thank you so much, and I really appreciate you sharing all your expertise and experience with this. I've been able to work with you for years and years on this issue, and you're such a champion and advocate, and obviously the advocacy needs continue, as you just demonstrated. So thank you so much for walking through all of this information today. I think that's really helpful as we're thinking about the path for Preschool for All and how we can make sure that we are getting the most out of this investment in our community. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, and we have a second panel. All right, and I just want to do a time check. We do have a second briefing today on span of control, so just to keep that in mind.
Well, I'm going to be brief because Commissioner Singleton is also going to say a few comments because this is a topic that the two of us and our offices have talked quite a bit about. And that is, what is the best possible inclusion policy and supports that the Preschool for All program can implement? I would first like to start grounding this conversation in the lived experiences of families with children who have special needs, and how historically it has been incredibly difficult, if not impossible, regardless of income, but I'm sure it is significantly more challenging for lower income families to even access preschool for their children. So I think it is incredibly important to lift up the decision that was made at the inception of this program to be an inclusive program. And I am incredibly proud that Multnomah County made that decision. It does set us apart from, frankly, the state, which I have strong feelings because it is actually illegal to not take children with disability. But when you don't set up a system for that to be successful, it becomes a really, really difficult situation for families and providers. So this is not a critique of should we have an inclusion policy. It is more a conversation of, now that we've got years of experience, what might we want to consider doing to make this program even more successful? And I think one of the things that's hard about this conversation is I don't know what true cost of care will tell us about our rates. We might be close, we might be a little off here, we might be over there, no idea. I think when we talk about inclusion and how to successfully do inclusion, it does have a potential of costing more. But I do want to acknowledge the unbelievable value that it has for our community, for these children, their families, and our K-12 partners. Just by having an inclusive policy, regardless of support, we reduce special education costs for our K-12 partners by 6%. Having a supported inclusion policy that allows kids to get those foundational skills before they enter our K-12 system can improve that exponentially. So I just ground us in that because this is something that I feel is has the potential to be, and has already been, incredibly impactful for children. And the resources put into early intervention, the research is incredibly clear, which is not all. We don't do some of the intensive therapies, that's for the state's early intervention policy, but to help braid that and to create an environment where those kids are supported with some external services is of incredible value to our community. And so my goal with this conversation is for us to just think about what's possible. We will have to weigh, what we can achieve and not achieve, but there have been challenges, as any new policy will create challenges. We're going to hear about some of those challenges. We're going to think about possible investments or strategies, and it's just to get us a check-in on a policy that, frankly, is setting a higher bar, and let's make sure we're doing it right, is the goal of this conversation. So I'll turn it over to Commissioner Singleton.
Excuse me. Thank you, Commissioner. I really appreciate being able to partner with you on this. I think over the summer I spoke with providers and staff in district, and what came up from everybody was a need for a deeper look at supportive services that are a part of our inclusion policy. And agree with Commissioner Moyer, this is really about, we have to make sure that we're matching resources with the need on the ground. And I think we do have higher numbers of kids with special needs because of state policies that allow those exclusions or expulsions and denials. And so it may be something that levels out as the state implements some new policy, but I think for now we have to really look at what's happening on the ground, what our providers need. They want to be serving kids. They want to be serving kids with special needs. They just want to be able to do it well. And so to me, this is a really critical point for us as we're looking at the cost. We may, this isn't something that takes 3 to 6 months to implement, like the true cost of care. We can know right now what we need so we can forecast that into the projections of what we think this program costs to run for next fiscal year as we're looking at some of the policy decisions that we have as a board. And so I think we have one of our panelists online today. Thank you, Tasia. You already pulled Anna up. And then Tammy and Angie, if you want to come on down to the dais and introduce yourselves, we're really grateful for you to be here. And I think lastly, I just want to say, it's important at the county that we hear from providers about what they need and that we do that in an environment and culture of safety. People need to feel safe, they need to be safe. If we don't hear what's really going on, we can improve things. So I appreciate you taking the time to be here today.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Angie Garcia. Thank you, everyone, for giving us time this morning. Anna is not quite ready to testify. She is doing enrollment paperwork for Preschool for All families, so she will let us know when she's ready, and Tammy will go next.
Hi, I'm Tammy Hamamoto. I'm the Preschool Program Integration Site Support Coordinator at Escuela Viva. Thank you, Commissioners, for the opportunity to speak today. I want to begin by acknowledging that the county's continued investment in early childhood education and inclusion, Preschool for All demonstrates a commitment for serving children equitably and has failed to address the critical need to support the educators who care for them. While these systems are very well-intentioned, there are significant gaps that leave classrooms under-resourced and teachers very under-supported. First, classrooms are often set up for failure because before children even walk through the door. Many early learning providers receive little to no information about a child's development, behavioral, or support needs prior to enrollment, making it nearly impossible to prepare for staffing, for classroom supports, or safety plans. If providers had a better understanding of the PFA children that they would be serving, they can prepare their classrooms and hire proper teachers and get the materials they need for that school year for that child. Preschool for All needs to develop a process to assess the needs of children entering the program in order to inform providers who they are serving. This is a system failure that results in children leaving Preschool for All because families are unhappy with the care provided. Providers lose teachers because the demands do not match the program's capabilities, and sometimes children and staff get hurt. Without consistent, proactive information sharing, classrooms remain in a reactive mode that strains teachers and destabilizes learning environments. When a child with previously unknown high needs starts preschool in the fall, providers must start the long process of identifying needs and getting approval of services through MECP. These processes often take many weeks to months and results in overburdened teachers, lots of administrative time to coordinate meetings and referrals, and sometimes ends in the child leaving the program and/or a program losing qualified teachers. If this child gets through the eligibility process and starts receiving MEC services, the program can apply for inclusion support funds through Preschool for All. However, they do not get compensated for increased staffing costs retroactively. Therefore, the provider has operated at a loss over this period of time. Second, while inclusion support funds are very helpful, they are not always sufficient or equitably distributed. Approval is largely based on the number of children with IFSPs in the classroom, an approach that does not reflect real classroom complexities. A classroom may fall short of the required number of IFSPs, yet still be managing extremely challenging behaviors, safety concerns, or high emotional or developmental needs. When funding is denied in these cases, teachers are left without critical support and children are placed in environments that are not fully equipped to serve them well. Needs do not always show up neatly in numbers, and our funding structures must reflect the reality to truly support educators and children. And lastly, teachers are being asked to do increasingly complex work without adequate training or support. As classrooms become more inclusive, educators are working with children who have higher and more specialized needs, yet access to high-quality inclusion and special education training remains very limited. When children with official diagnoses enter classrooms, teachers should not be expected to just figure it out. Without targeted, accessible, and free training specific to these diagnoses, issues arise, leading to safety concerns, ineffective strategies, burnout, and turnover. If we want stable, high-quality classrooms and better outcomes for children, then robust, ongoing support for teachers is non-negotiable. Preschool for All needs to address these systemic gaps by recognizing that inclusion is not just about access. It is about preparation, support, and sustainability. Investing upstream information sharing, flexible funding, and strong educator support will lead to more stable classrooms, qualified teachers, and better outcome for children and families across the county. Thank you.
Again, my name is Angie Garcia. Anna's not quite ready yet, so I'm going to go ahead and say what I have to say. Thank you again for your time. I first want to acknowledge, before I jump into this, that we talk a lot about the pressures on Preschool for All providers, but I also want to acknowledge that the Preschool for All staff, PEL at the county, they are under a fair amount of stress, a lot of pressure, a lot of tension, and they are doing a very good job with this very large lift that we have right now. So I want to just preface my testimony before I jump in. I work with early childhood providers all over the county, small in-home programs and centers. What you've heard today so far is not isolated. It is echoed across programs of all sizes and in every part of the county. What you're hearing is serving high-need students, or as Dana said, what did she say? She said it so beautifully. Exceptional students is challenging, and how we provide this service must be altered. We need, first of all, providers need to know who the children are before they come into their care. Right now, many providers receive little or no information about a child's developmental, behavioral, or support needs until after enrollment. That means teachers are meeting a child's needs in real time, without preparation, appropriate staffing, or safety planning. This is how classrooms end up, as you heard in Tammy's testimony, functioning as de facto special ed classrooms, with sometimes 60% or more of the program's children having high needs, without the staffing, training, or funding that those settings require. We need resources and staffing that match the reality of classrooms. Providers need lower ratios and the ability to fund additional staff when classrooms have multiple high-need students. Hands-on practical training and consultation tied to the children they are actually serving, and time built in for transitions, time for families and children before placement, so we can plan supports, adjust the environment, and set realistic expectations. When funding is tied only to IFSP counts or requires weeks of documentation and waiting, programs are left operating at a loss and teachers are left overburdened. This is pushing people out of the workforce and destabilizing classrooms. We need an enrollment process that matches children with programs that can truly meet their needs. Right now, families are often left to navigate PFA options on their own without clear guidance about which settings are prepared and trained to support their child's particular needs. This can lead to children being placed in programs that are not designed or staffed for their level of support. Families feel misled, frustrated when they expect one-on-one support for their child, which is not feasible. Pressures on providers to either disclose confidential information, which we can't, remove a child, or stretch far beyond what is safe and sustainable. We need a county-wide enrollment and placement process that, number one, assesses support needs before placement is made, help families understand the range of program types and supports that are available, and intentionally match children and programs that have the training, staffing, and environment to support them well. Providers are not asking to not serve children with high needs. We are asking for the information, staffing, training, and funding to serve these children well without burning out our teachers or compromising safety. If we are to fulfill our promise of true inclusion, we need a system that, first, shares information proactively so providers can prepare, funds smaller ratios and additional staffing when support needs are high, offer practical ongoing training tied to specific diagnoses and behaviors, and create an enrollment and placement process that supports informed choices for families and sustainable classrooms for providers. Inclusion is not just about opening the door, it's about ensuring that once children walk through it, the people on the other side are prepared, supported, and able to stay. As a PAG member, I also want to highlight how the current gaps in PFA's inclusion supports are limiting the TAG's ability to give the board fully informed guidance. Right now, the true cost of care of serving children with higher needs is not adequately built into the PFA's fiscal modeling. When we talk about cost growth and the revenue needed to sustain the program, our recommendations are based on what PFA is currently spending, not on what it will actually cost to provide high-quality preschool with appropriate inclusion supports at full implementation. Because the system has not yet fully resourced smaller ratios, added staffing, training, and transition supports for children with higher needs, we simply do not have the accurate data. Both the TAG and PAG have been clear in recent meetings that we lack the information necessary to build a realistic cost model for inclusion. For this reason, it is essential that the board, one, acknowledge and address the current inadequacies of PFA inclusion supports for providers and families, as well invest in true cost of care fiscal modeling that specifically accounts for the real cost of serving children with high needs, so that PFA rates can be set at levels that make inclusive, high-quality care sustainable. Thank you. Let's see if Anna's ready.
Thank you. Yeah, Tasia, can we check in with Anna?
She's ready.
Hi, Anna. Can you unmute yourself?
Hello.
I can hear you. Thank you.
Hi. My name is Anna Pickell. I run a childcare center in Northeast Portland called Happy Go Lucky Childcare. We have been a PFA program for this school year, and prior to that also did Preschool Promise. We're currently dual funded right now. When I started talking with my inclusion coordinator about children that we had with IFSPs or that were coming to us with IFSPs, it was very challenging being a dual funded program, as children that were Preschool Promise that had IFSPs in the same classroom as Preschool for All children with IFSPs did not make us eligible for inclusion funds. They said all the children had to be from Preschool for All for that to be eligible. It took quite a bit of advocating on my end to get one of our classrooms qualified for inclusion funds, because we had some children with high level of elopement. We utilize a public park that is next to our building for our playground, as we do not have our own private playground. And due to the ongoing challenges we were having with safety and elopement of PFA children specifically, we were able to get one of our classrooms qualified for those inclusion funds. I was grateful for those funds. However, how to utilize those funds was very confusing initially. I was never given any details on how I was supposed to utilize those funds or how I could claim them. I relied on other providers that I knew that had inclusion funds to help me with that, and I was given incorrect information. So it wasn't until I had a follow-up conversation with the inclusion supervisor that I found out that inclusion funds are now being given to programs as a flat rate amount, where you claim the whole amount to simplify it for programs. That is a wonderful change, but that has still not been communicated out to programs. The inclusion supervisor let me know that he has been working on revising the inclusion policy for the past 6 months, but it had not yet been approved to be sent out to programs. As far as I know, that still has not gone out to programs, which makes it very challenging for programs to use their inclusion funds appropriately, effectively, and efficiently when they're not being given all of the information. Inclusive classrooms require sustained and reliable funding. When inclusion funding depends on continually providing or proving eligibility, programs face staffing instabilities. As soon as a classroom no longer, quote, qualifies, that provider must either find alternative funding for specialized staff or eliminate those positions. This instability undermines workforce retention, continuity of care, and the quality of inclusive programming. Consistent inclusion funding is essential to retain skilled educators and maintain stable learning environments. One of my staff that I hired for this school year was paid for with inclusion funds at a different school, and his job ended up getting eliminated, causing him to have to, seek out new work. When I hired him, he wanted to really be sure that his job wasn't going to be contingent on any of that funding moving forward, because having to constantly change jobs as funding changes is really challenging, not only for programs, but for staff as well. Clear communication and shared expectations with families are also critical to successful inclusion. Families of children receiving IFSPs benefit from clear information and training on PFA's inclusion policy, so they understand what inclusive classrooms can realistically provide. Without this understanding, families may expect one-on-one support, which is not feasible, leading to frustration and strained relationships. I just experienced this with one of our families recently, and they ended up leaving Preschool for All because of it. They continuously were requiring us to violate our inclusion policies and practices and go against what PFA has told us we are allowed to do, because they felt their child needed a higher level of one-on-one care that we were not allowed to provide. I truly believe their misunderstanding of PFA's policies and practices caused a lot of the friction in us trying to sort this out and help everybody meet in the middle to meet the child's needs in the best ways possible. Additional resources are also needed to support parents of typically developing children in understanding the needs of non-typically developing peers. In classrooms with higher support needs, educators are often overwhelmed without adequate staffing, which can lead to misperceptions about teacher performance and increased family concerns, especially when injuries occur. Providers are frequently asked to disclose confidential information or remove a child with special needs from a classroom, requests that are inconsistent with inclusive policies and best practices. I know many programs have experienced this when there is a child repeatedly having aggressive behavior towards others or acting out aggressively in the classroom. Families are coming to the staff very upset about, why are we not doing more about this? Why are we not taking this child's behavior more seriously? Obviously, we can't disclose a lot of that information because of confidentiality. And again, we cannot remove children from classrooms because of the PFA inclusion policy that exists. So it really puts teachers in between a rock and a hard place. There's no way for us to adequately help parents understand that we are doing our jobs to the best of our ability without violating confidentiality of that child, or it might also be very difficult to keep everyone in the classroom safe when we don't have the ability to have that child maybe go take a break elsewhere in the building, or utilize different strategies other than a room clear, which is a common practice in public schools, to help keep other children safe when their peer is having a difficult time that day. A practical solution to help fund multiple enrollment spots when a classroom seat is occupied by a child with significant support needs, recognizing the need for smaller ratios and additional staffing. This could be accomplished in partnership with MECP by supporting a tiered or rating system to quantify support needs consistently. Research shows that smaller class sizes both benefit children with disabilities and many neurotypical children, and the financial responsibility for meeting those needs should not rest solely on private childcare providers. I know this has been a practice in other states where they have utilized paying a program for 2 or 3 slots that are taken up by one child who potentially has higher needs that require a reduced ratio and additional staffing. Then the program is not having to suffer financial losses while also being able to meet the needs of that child more efficiently and effectively. Thank you for listening to my testimony today.
Great, thank you so much. I think that's all for the panel, so we can open it up to the board for questions. We can start with Commissioner Brim Edwards.
Good morning. I want to thank all three of you for your presentations, and I'd like to request, if it's possible, can we get a written copy, just so, I took a lot of notes, but it also would be helpful to have, if that's okay. I think you raised some very important points, and what really struck me is just the parallels between the K-12 school system and and the needs that staff have in order to support students. And in my experience, just with the K-12 school system, there always is an interest in best serving the child, but without training, resources, and staffing. It is frustrating for the staff because they want to provide and support those students, but without sort of external support, it's very hard to do. So to me, it's very much struck me as the parallels, and again, I think looking at the true costs and some of the ideas that were presented this morning as ways to address that should be considered going forward. So I'm looking forward to that being part of the sort of evolve conversation on supporting the program. I did have, this is more of a question maybe for the county staff about, in the past, MESD provided sort of like early intervention and supports prior to students entering entering kindergarten, and I'm wondering what services MESD is currently providing and how that integrates, or whether that could be leveraged with on behalf of a lot of our providers.
Okay, and we can follow up with that information.
I can give you a short answer if you'd like it, or you want to wait for PEL.
Well, we can have PEL give, and we have another briefing, so I want to make sure that we have time for both, but thank you.
I'd love to get that follow.
Yeah.
So who's going to, is that the?
Yeah, Rachel Pearl will follow.
Okay, great. Because again, it's not the solution, but I do think they have resources and historically have provided supports for students before they get into kindergarten. So I'd love to see how we could braid those together.
Great. Thank you. Commissioner Jones-Dixon.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for coming in and providing just your feedback regarding the program. Heard you loud and clear as far as the inclusion policy and just taking a look at the enrollment. Are we going to receive like a formal recommendation from the PAG for our consideration in the near future, outlining these recommendations and others?
Yes, so this spring, we're going to be getting recommendations from both the TAG and the PAG.
Okay.
Yep.
I don't have any additional questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Commissioner Moyer?
Yeah,
Commissioner Singleton?
thank you so much for being here and talking about this. And again, I want to say that we are embarking on work that is long overdue. I mean, I just don't know how to say that more clearly. We didn't have fully inclusive K-12 education until IDEA passed, and we can argue if we do yet. This is an area that traditionally kids with high support needs were not included. So I don't look at this as we're doing it wrong, as we're doing it new. And we have to constantly be having conversations about how we do it better. And I am really proud of us for having hard conversations about these things, because I just see such tremendous value in it. But we're never going to nail it out of the bat. And this is a really important conversation, and I really appreciate having providers who are willing to talk about this, because these can be sensitive subjects. Historically, they have been controversial, and so I appreciate the intentions of our providers around wanting to do it right and wanting to be supported in doing it right, and that is really important work. I would also like to acknowledge that our Preschool for All staff have already begun digging into this work. I was really happy with some of the initial, just inclusion policy review work that has happened, and this is, this is going to be ongoing. And then I want to just say that these are two issues that are important to talk about now because they both have implications for the 2027 budget decisions that we need to make, as well as the TAG has brought up concerns about not having this information when it comes to giving their recommendations and wanting to be able to get them the information that they need to be able to give us the most informed recommendations they can, which is why I do plan on bringing forward a budget modification related to a true cost of care study, as well as looking at a inclusion pilot, which would work with kids before they start PFA around identification and family support and transitioning into preschool. But thank you so much for coming here and sharing with us.
Thank you
Appreciate it so much.
Commissioner Singleton.
Thank you. Just appreciate again you making the time to come here, knowing that your day job has already started, and just the work that you're doing every day. Just really appreciate you all, and Anna as well, and the PEL staff. I just want to reiterate, I know we said it at the beginning, but this is not an indictment of the program or the staff. It's really just a necessary conversation to help us understand and program staff understand about the needs on the front lines. We're not on the front lines of the work. Only you can tell us what that looks like. So just this has been really helpful. There's some really specific things you identified that I think are really important for us to look at and look at the opportunities to make some of these improvements. And it's a theme, as you said, that I'm hearing across providers. So thank you for being the folks who stood up here today and said it. And I just hope we're able to make some of these adjustments as we look at this program for 27. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to appreciate, I know that Escuela Viva was one of the early adopters for Free School for All, and you guys have been not just a partner in providing such joyful quality preschool to so many children and families, but also partnering alongside us through the years to as we implement the program and bring it forward, and just appreciate all you've brought forward today. I know that you are deeply engaged with our preschool and early learning division and will continue to do so, and just appreciate having a chance to hear from you both today. So thank you, and thank you, Anna, as well. I don't know if she's still online or not, but just appreciate her words and really the specifics that she gave in terms of solutions as well. So thank you both very much. Appreciate this. And thank you again to District 1 and District 2, Commissioners Moyer and Singleton, for bringing this forward today. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and move to our second briefing today. We are a little short on time, so but I know this is this important presentation. So I'm going to ask Chris Neal, our Chief Operating Officer, Cessa Diaz, and is Laura also coming down today? Great, to come on down. And I'm going to pass this over to Commissioner Moyer, as this report is in response to budget note number 6.
All right, thank you so much. Welcome to everyone's favorite topic, span of control. Woohoo! But I think I'm excited for this conversation, and I appreciate the work that has gone into getting us here today. Having already gone through one budget cycle of reductions that unfortunately did result in the loss of positions, and seeing that as unfortunately something we will have to repeat, having a conversation about span and control or management to staff ratio, I think is really important, so that we are finding the leanest way possible to continue to deliver high quality services. None of this is easy, and I am not saying that any of this work will or will not relate to position changes, but I do think as we move forward through our budget process, being able to have a snapshot of what is, and potentially where we need to challenge ourselves to operate in a leaner fashion as we go through very difficult budget writing process. You know, I do hope that departments have looked at this report and are engaging in conversations and asking themselves, is this in keeping with trying to be as efficient and cost-effective as possible in order to preserve direct service? But I think my motivation for the budget note, and I thank my colleagues for supporting it, is to help guide leadership in conversations around making sure that we are having a shared sacrifice approach, that we are striving toward organizational efficiency, and at points stretching it. Honestly, I don't think always it's easy to really look at some of these issues and say, ideally we would be here, but we can continue to operate here. And unfortunately, I think that that's where we're at in our budget conversations. So thank you so much for this work. I appreciate it. I found it very helpful in my understanding of where we're at as a county. And I look forward to continuing to look at this throughout our budget process. Thanks.
Great. Good morning. We'll pass it over to you, Chris, to kick us off.
Yep, let's do this. So good morning, Christopher Neal, COO. So today, as you heard, we're going to present the findings of the span of control study in response during fiscal year 2026, budget note number 6, sponsored by Commissioner Moyer. Thank you, ma'am. First things first, I want to call out Laura Sampson and Cessa Diaz for doing the deep dive work here and briefing your offices ahead of time before today, and for building this presentation. And so, as you'll see, they've done great work that will do exactly what the commissioner just said, guiding us to be more efficient and effective, not just here, but also for our community. Now, the budget note called for a target average management to staff ratio of 1:7. And I'm excited to share that our organization is not only meeting that goal, but we are exceeding it. Our countywide average span of control is actually 1:11 when you include all employee types. And even when we narrow down that lens to just regular and limited duration employees, we're still at 1:9. So here's what we're doing about it and some outcomes, because we talk about outcomes all the time, so I want to show you that we're doing something with this. First, our strategic plan focus area number 5, outcome 2, calls for continuous improvement within our processes. So before we spike the football too hard, because that's what this prezzo is going to be about, even though we're already in a strong position today, we're taking proactive steps to maintain this efficiency and maintain our organizational focus. And here's how we're doing that. HR, the deputy COOs, the department leaders, like you just asked about, Commissioner, are reviewing this data in detail. They've already done that. And they're actively addressing any areas of potential concern right now. Also, in this year's budget process, I think you read my notes ahead of time before you did your opening, department leaders are using this data to inform their budget planning for fiscal year 2027. And we've also now established that our ratio will be 1:7 as our departmental and countywide benchmark. And finally, beginning next fiscal year, HR will provide regular reports on span of control twice a year. Now, I'll turn it over to the presentation over to the architects themselves, Laura and Cessa, to review the study methodology and specific findings. Over to you, Cessa.
Good morning.
Thank you, Chris. Good morning, Chair and Commissioners. My name is Cessa Diaz. I'm the Interim Chief Human Resources Officer for the county. Really appreciate the opportunity to be here today. As Chris shared, Central HR is here to present the report and findings on span of control. The analysis was led by Laura Sampson, our class comp manager, with the dedicated support of her team. When we began this work in the summer, we knew that to get to a 1:7 ratio, we first had to understand our starting point. We've spent the last 6 months digging into the data and vetting every detail with department HR teams, department directors, and the COO's office. This collaborative process ensures we're all working from a single validated source of truth regarding our current organizational structure. The report and org charts we've shared reflect our current reality, and we look forward to presenting them to you today. But before I do that, I do want to share that in addition to this presentation, we have also reached out to our union partners. Key union leaders raised span of control concerns with the board late last year, and we plan to share this information with them as well. I will now hand the presentation over to Laura, who will walk you through the report and analysis. Thank you.
Hi, Laura Sampson. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the class comp manager. I will be presenting the slides today. Up first, just some highlights from this budget note to set the stage for what we're discussing. So the budget note indicated the best practices for SPAN generally suggests 1 to 5 to 1 to 10, with each manager leading approximately 5 to 10 direct reports. However, the ideal ratio, of course, can vary based on the nature of work, experience of employees and managers, and the level of interaction between them. Objectives in this budget note were to evaluate our current span of control, to evaluate how we can have tighter adherence to maximizing frontline staff, and to achieve policy compliance by January 2026, we were asked to provide a written report to the board on achieving an average management to staff ratio of 1 to 7 or greater, organizational charts, and an implementation strategy. Next slide. Before we go into methodology and numbers, we wanted to acknowledge some of the considerations beyond the numbers that we took when evaluating our supervisory positions and roles at the county. So first, the concept of working managers. We acknowledge that all managers are working managers. For some, though, the degree to which they are responsible for a portfolio of work and operations in addition to supervisory responsibilities such as hiring, assigning and reviewing the work, setting goals, and monitoring budgets is more significant and complex than others, and that may contribute to their overall span size. While the term working manager was not used as a singular reason to exclude any position from further analysis that didn't have a span of 7 or greater, it's still an important piece to acknowledge as we dive into this data. And in a later slide, I'll get into the specific reasons that were used for positions with spans under 7 that we deemed necessary. Second is external responsibilities for staff or functions that cannot always be seen on an org chart, budgetary authority and responsibility, and then some of our job profiles are specialties that have commonly small spans. We see this in a few jobs such as project managers, administrative jobs. Our administrative analyst seniors are part of this analysis, practicing medical directors, practicing attorneys, a few jobs like that. Next slide, please. Here shows a chart, again, considerations beyond the numbers that speak to numbers and why spans might be wider versus narrower in different settings. So a few of these are nature of the work. If the nature of the work is highly complex, you might see a narrower span. If the nature of the work is not as complex, a wider span may be appropriate. And the same goes for all of the following reasons listed, including similarity of activities performed by staff supervised, clarity of organizational objectives, degree of task certainty, degree of risk to the organization, degree of public scrutiny, burden of non-supervisory duties, degree of coordination required, availability of staff assistance, and geographic location of reporting staff. Next slide, please. So to give a hypothetical org chart that shows something that we did find in some of our positions, here we have a director with 5 direct reports, which would fall below our desired standard benchmark of 7. But what does their full span look like? Next slide. So here, again, hypothetical org chart, but we see this in a lot of situations at the county where the direct span of control that counts towards our countywide average may be 5, but when we expand out, we see that that director's total span of control and total responsibilities that fall under their purview are much larger. Therefore, that type of a span was deemed appropriate. Next slide. Going over our supervisory job structures. So first, it's important to note that at any level of the organization, individual contributors or non-supervising positions can and do report. At the top, we have our department directors and deputy department directors. This is the top-level leadership position over a department. They typically have reporting directors and managers. An example would be our DCA department and deputy directors. The next level is division directors. This is a top level over a division within a department. Typically, they will have reporting managers. An example here, continuing with DCA, would be their facilities division director. Then we have managers. This is our top level over programs and functions within the county. They may have reporting supervisors or lower level managers, or they have budget, FTE, and responsibilities that are at that manager level. An example would be a DCA facilities senior manager that oversees several functional areas within the facilities division. And finally, we have supervisors. These are frontline supervisors over programs and staff, and they'll have reporting non-supervisory staff. So again, building upon this facilities example, we have a supervisor over safety and compliance within that division. Next slide, please. The methodology for our study, so positions that we included as supervisory are all positions that are in non-represented job profiles that require the supervision of staff. Positions that were included as non-supervisory are positions in all other job profiles, which can include some job profiles that may supervise staff but do not require it. Employee types that we included for SPAN are regular status, limited duration, temporary, on-call, and interns. The reason we did this wider look is that supervisory work exists with all position types and employee types. Although we did a secondary analysis, as Chris alluded to, with regular and limited duration only, in both of these we excluded contractors and volunteers from SPAN numbers. Next slide. We used two calculations in this study, the first being the average span of control. This is achieved by taking the number of direct reports to each supervisory position averaged out. Next, we looked at a non-supervisor to supervisor ratio. This is a non-supervisor position count divided by the supervisor position count. Next slide. I'm going to go over the calculation example of those two calculations I mentioned to show why those numbers do come out slightly different. So here we have another hypothetical org chart as a visual. We have a director with one direct report being a manager and a manager who has 6 direct non-supervisory reports. So this org chart has 2 supervisory positions and 6 non-supervisory positions in total. When we look at span of control, we would count the director's span of 1 and the manager's span of 6. Averaging out, we get to 3.5. In the ratio calculation, we would simply take non-supervisors, the count of 6, divided by supervisors, the count of 2, and we come out with 3. So the ratio will always come out a little bit lower because supervisors or managers who report up to another layer of supervisory position are not counted in that span of control. And again, we looked both ways for our study. Next slide. Span of control at the county. So our countywide average span, when we include all employee types, being limited duration, regular status, on-call, intern, and temporary workers, is 1 to 11. When we look at limited duration and regular status direct reports only, we are at 9. Next slide, please. Here we see the breakdown by department. So we just went over our countywide averages. You can see our departments vary based on specialized area, department needs. So the numbers range from slightly below 7 to well above 7. And this chart includes all employee types. Next slide, please. Same chart here, but reduced down to regular status and limited duration only. These are our departmental averages. Again, we see numbers all over the board, and we have been working hard to meet with each department leader in partnership with the COO's office to discuss pockets within every department that fall below 7. Next slide, please. Supervisory ratio at a glance. This is the second calculation that we looked at. So our countywide ratio, when we include all employee types, is 10. And our countywide ratio, when we go down to limited duration and regular status employee types only, is 8. So we drop by 1 in each category compared to span of control. Next slide. The reviews that took place to get to these results, we did 2 major data polls with our departments, first in September and then again in December. So this data is effective December 1st, 2025. We reviewed 663 managers. 68% were at or above 1 to 7, 31% were below 1 to 7, and then looking a little more narrow, below 1 to 5 was 22% of positions. Next slide, please. So for those positions that fell below 1 to 7 in their span of control, we were able to categorize several of them in partnership with human resources and leadership discussions. The top right here, the light blue, this is acceptable span, small span, based on job profile. These are the practicing medical directors, administrative analysts, seniors, some of those job profiles I mentioned in the beginning. This accounted for 13% of those positions. 1%, a small amount, was a data error, excuse me, and was excluded. 30% in this yellow category were marked for HR and leadership reviews. These are the positions, as Chris mentioned, that Central HR and the COO's office have been meeting individually with department directors on to review positions falling below 7, learn more about them, and talk about alternative solutions and ideas. The green, 31%, these are positions that meet with their total span of control. So thinking back to that hypothetical director who has 5 reports, but their total span is maybe 100, that's the positions that fit within here. Orange is necessary to not overload the next level. This was 7% of positions. These were positions that fell below 7 in their span of control, but they were part of an organizational structure that otherwise had really high spans, and we didn't see that work naturally fitting into another area. A small portion here, 5%, were not looked into further because they already have identified end dates due to funding sources, work out of class assignments, or temporary positions. And then finally, the dark blue, 13% were identified as a special program that needs a manager, sort of regardless of span. A good example here is our workplace security program. Because we aren't including contractors and volunteers in this analysis, that span of control on paper falls below 7, but we know that the total responsibility of that position is much greater. Okay, next slide. Best practices. So we looked externally to see what we could learn and adopt at the county. Largely speaking, we found that reliable research is not easily found that will indicate what the exact span of control should be for an organization of our size, public sector. There's plenty of research out there, though all of the research that we found does acknowledge that there isn't a one-size-fits-all approach, and there are a lot of factors to consider when looking at span of control for individual positions. We did a survey out to local jurisdictions to see what others are doing in this area. We had 7 local jurisdictions respond. 3 have no minimum spans in place. 4 do have minimum spans for certain jobs that range from 2 to 5, and all recognize that needs vary by position. Next slide. Best practices at the state of Oregon. So the state of Oregon probably has the most information out there around span of control and their adherence to it. The state has an ORS that sets their baseline ratio at 1 to 11. However, within that ORS, agencies establish their own maximum depending on a number of factors. Those can include the geographic location of direct reports, nature of the work, complexity of the work, budgetary responsibilities. An agency can be exempted from these limitations if an additional supervisory position is reasonably necessary. The state does a quarterly report out to show different ratio standards by agency, and we see that they actually vary quite a bit from 1 to 11, and it's not a straight across the board statewide expectation. A few examples here, their Department of Public Safety standards and training. Theirs is higher at 1 to 18. Transportation is right at 1 to 11. And then we see others like the Housing and Community Services at 1 to 7, Public Utility Commission at 1 to 6. So we saw a broad range. How the state ensures compliance with this is they track overall ratios by agency. So that indicates that there's flexibility within those state agencies. They are not doing a manager by manager review. Meaning within an agency, they might have one manager with a span of 1 to 20 and one with a span of 1 to 4, so long as their average is in compliance. Next slide. Okay, moving forward. So while we are already exceeding the budget note, We have found this information to be beneficial, particularly in developing budgets. So right now we have a division level analysis by department with some FY27 projection tools that are being utilized now by our finance and budget teams in coordination with the Central Budget Office. We would like this to be an ongoing annual tool to help inform budget planning and provide our departments with their spans of control so that they can report those in their budgets. Biannual report out from Central HR. This will occur in August for a view of post-budget adoption impacts, and again in January to help in the planning of the upcoming budgets for our departments. We're establishing guidelines at set 1 to 7 as the departmental and county-wide benchmark with criteria for CHRO to review if exceptions are requested. And that concludes our slides, and we are happy to take questions at this time.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for all of the work that went into this. This was really helpful, and I know you were able to meet and brief folks ahead of this as well. I'll open it up to see if there are any questions for the board. We'll start with Commissioner Jones-Dixon.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you all for the presentation and for the time yesterday briefing us. You answered my 2 questions regarding just union engagement and then how are we leveraging Spark as far as supporting the work. On the last slide, can you share, are we going to be using, I'm assuming we'll be using Spark as far as supporting bullet point 2 on the last slide? As far as the division level analysis by department with?
Yes,
Okay.
Definitely. We will appreciate anyone's help who wants to jump in and figure out how we can make this a better and smoother process moving forward. This year has been all about how we figure it out, so I definitely think there's room to refine it in future years.
Yeah, great. Thank you. This is extremely helpful, and thank you again, Commissioner Moyer, for bringing this forward.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Moyer, did you have any questions on this? I know it was your item.
No, but I thank everybody for this work, and I'm glad that it was not an exercise in futility. And I appreciate the desire to continue with it. I find it very helpful as somebody who is, a year into this role to be able to look at this and see where we're at and have that level of insight. And I encourage department heads to take this seriously. It is not easy. None of this is easy. But we got to hold ourselves to a high standard and sadly a lean standard in times in which we will inevitably cut things that nobody wants to cut. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Singleton.
Thank you, and thank you, Commissioner, for moving this budget note forward. I appreciate the work as well as just the briefing and you answering some of my questions. I will say, just to kind of read the board in, I'm just as concerned about those with low span of control as I am with those with really high span of control. I think that we have to take a lens to this, and maybe that's a next step of improvement of if direct services are being provided. The level of clinical supervision that is needed for folks providing direct services is vastly different than administrative work. It just is, and we should be thinking about that. I don't necessarily expect DCHS to have almost 12 when we have other departments that don't do direct services that are around close to 7, maybe under 7. So I think taking a little bit of differentiation of what the actual work is of that department will be a critical next step of process improvement for this. I think one thing is we don't often, I talked about this in last budget, and I don't think this is necessarily a U2 issue. It's because it's not span of control, but we're not being quite as attentive to the impacts on providers that we contract with to do this work when they're facing reductions and we're putting them out of whack on span of control and or massive staff reductions. So it will be something I'll continue to ask in this budget cycle, is not just what's the impact on county staff, but what is the impact on our provider staff as we're making these terrible reductions that we have to make, because we have a tendency, and I mean we as government has a tendency to ask nonprofits to do work on the cheap And when we cut there. And I think it's really critical that we're balancing to make sure that any reductions aren't just hitting those who are doing direct services. So not necessarily a U2 thing, maybe a you thing a little bit.
I picked that up when you kept saying not a you too thing. I was like, oh, it must be me.
Little bit you. But yeah, I'll be asking about it as we move forward. So thank you for the work and for spending the time to walk me through this a couple weeks ago. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Brown-Edwards.
Good morning. I want to start by thanking Commissioner Moyer for offering this budget note and for the report, which I hope that it's going to inform our upcoming budget work. I appreciate the briefing I got in advance and answering all the questions, and that in addition to the presentation this morning, that the org charts, the very detailed org charts are being uploaded as an appendix information, because I think that will be helpful again as we head into our budget process. As we head into a really challenging, I don't have any questions. I have most of them answered, and I view this as more a opportunity to receive the information and, from my perspective, talk about how we're going to use it to inform our work ahead. So as we head into a very challenging budget environment, I think it's going to be more important than ever that we prioritize direct services and that we have an efficient, effective organizational structure that helps deliver that and that also is accountable. I do want to point out that, because there was mention that the target is 1 to 7, but the budget note that was approved by the board said required a written report to the board on achieving an average management to staff ratio of 1 to 7 or greater. Just a fine point, and I wouldn't put the fine point on or underline that or greater. Again, I think there are more opportunities to flatten the work structure or improve that ratio. Again, we're going to be making decisions about direct service delivery, and I think we all are going to want to make sure that we have the most cost-effective structure. In recent years, new management layers have been added centrally, and in this upcoming budget process, I hope that the budget will be looking at where consolidation of teams or departments can happen, how we can flatten the org structure. Having worked in a very large, complex organization, there are ways to, sometimes when you get very small teams or very small departments, the span of control just is small because there's not a lot of people who have job alikes, but sometimes when you have more centralized and consolidated departments or teams, that you can get more efficiencies in terms of span of control. You still have management and accountability that can support those teams, but it sometimes requires different structures. So I hope that as we head into this budget environment, that's something that's being considered versus we're just going to keep the same org structure and try and sort of squeeze out budget savings, because sometimes that's not going to result in better services in the most cost-efficient way. So I really appreciate this because I think it gives us the tools to and the information to look at how we set ourselves up for the next couple of years, which we know are going to be very, very challenging financially.
Thank you. So I just appreciate all the work that went into this. Thank you, Commissioner Moyer, for this budget note. I know that as we are having conversations even now for the FY27 budget with departments, this is something that is coming up that we're looking into, that we're asking about. We're getting the transparency on this. It is one of the things that was helpful for me, and again, I just really want to thank Laura, for your work on this, also for your work on this as well. To have this much information is helpful, but the considerations beyond the numbers, I mean, we've heard from different folks today on the board, like some of the things, that we should be considering, the direct service and kind of the intensity of that. But I think also the I think it was like slide 4, that showed just the difference consideration behind the numbers, that kind of graph of like, it's really there isn't a hard and fast rule. Even I think the state where they have that hard and fast rule, they do not, absolutely, there's still a variety, but it's about what are the guiding principles in terms of making decisions about span of control. How are we being accountable and diligent in making sure that what the actuality is matches what the intention is, and that it is working the best for the organization, and keeping in mind the fact that we are in a resource constraint environment. How can we make sure that we are using this as a point of which we can measure by as we're making really tough decisions. So again, and I know that was the intention that Commissioner Moyer talked about when she was introducing that, and I think that's a really important thing. Just one more thing as we're grappling with how to make these decisions, the tools that we can do to use to do that, and also make sure that we're having an organization that is operating with the best intentions of the people that we serve, who are benefiting from all of the work that the county does in the long term. So thank you very much for that. Appreciate this. And again, thanks for this budget note, and we will continue to have conversations around this issue. So that concludes our agenda for today. I appreciate the really great topics today. Our next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, January 29th at 9:30 a.m. There being no further business, we are adjourned.